So, hey, everybody, this is David, the AI Guide, and I'm very, very happy today to have Matthew Renze on. Matthew is a data science consultant. He's an author, he's a public speaker, and he's taught over 400,000 students software development and other IT issues. And he's delivered over 100 keynotes, presentations, and workshops at conferences and has been all over the world, which is, I want to hear about Antarctica. Matthew's clients range from Fortune 500 to small tech startups. Matthew is a Microsoft MVP in AI, which certainly is perfect for my audience, and ASP Insider and author for Pluralsight, Udemy, and Skillshare. And you're also an open source software contributor who focuses on AI, data science, and machine learning. So welcome.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. So would you please give us a brief introduction beyond what I just said and tell us about your consulting practice, please?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm essentially a data science consultant. I founded a company called Renze Consulting back in, I think, 2013, focusing specifically on artificial intelligence and machine learning and teaching artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science to software developers, IT professionals, managers, and other people within organizations. As you mentioned, I think I've taught over 400,000, somewhere between 400 and 500,000 students through my online courses, various workshops, webinar training, stuff like that. It's probably over 500,000 if I added everything up. And my clients essentially range from Fortune 500 companies to small tech startups. I enjoy working with both. They pose different sets of organizational challenges that we have to overcome. And I've delivered training on every continent in the world, including Antarctica. I was actually, I co-founded a conference in Antarctica called AntarcticConf, which was the first ever technology conference in Antarctica. It's focusing specifically on technology leadership and essentially trying to reduce the barrier of entry or reduce the costs or improve access to online technology education for underrepresented individuals, which leads to an organization called Renze Global. Our mission is essentially to improve access to technology education for underrepresented individuals. And we're trying to cultivate the next generation of tech community leaders, the people that start user groups, conferences, start mentoring and training other people as well. I started with my wife back in right around 2019. And then we did AntarcticConf as kind of our first big thing to kick it off. And if you can put on a conference in Antarctica, you could put on a conference anywhere in the world, which is kind of the hope. We're trying to figure out how to help people set up their own conferences in parts of the world that don't have good technology conferences right now. And essentially the overall end goal of everything that I do is just to try to ensure that the world ends up looking more like Star Trek than Skynet.
Terrific. Yeah, I follow Peter Diamandis, and he talks a lot about bringing the last 3 billion online. So that's terrific that you're doing that. How did you first get interested in AI and data science?
Well, I think I've always been interested in like technology and science in general. As a child, I was interested in robotics and computers, and I played around with electronics and just did a bunch of sciencey stuff. And then early on in my career, I got into software development, which was very fortunate because it was the right thing for me to be doing early on in my career. And then I kind of ended up choosing projects that we call them big data now, but like at the time, there wasn't even the term big data. We were just literally shipping hard drives through the mail full of data to keep the systems updated because we had so much and we were putting it on the internet in massive geospatial databases and stuff. And then I went on to do the same thing in the IoT space for energy data management for buildings and stuff like that. So I ended up finding that I was doing all of this data engineering stuff. We call it data engineering now. And data analytics stuff, and I just loved it. So, but I kind of hit a ceiling in my career, and I knew I couldn't go any further unless I went back to college and really studied this stuff, so I could say I'm an expert in it. Because I just felt like there was a lot of gaps in my knowledge. So I went back to college. I got double degrees in computer science and philosophy with a minor in economics from Iowa State University, and I focused my computer science electives on artificial intelligence and machine learning because that was what I was most interested in doing. At the time, they didn't really have the term data science. It wasn't a big thing back then. So when I first heard the term after I got out of college, and I was consulting as a software consultant, not a data science consultant, it would occur to me, this is exactly what I'm doing. Like, I'm already doing this. This is what I need to start calling it. So I essentially started my own data science consulting company because there just wasn't a lot of it happening in Iowa at the time. And then I've gradually kind of transitioned it more from general data science consulting to more AI and automation. The main distinction being, with data science, we're helping people make better decisions with data. With AI, we're essentially teaching the machines how to make better decisions on their own with data. And that led to my consulting career and then the consulting firm, which has gone really well. And even now, I still can't seem to get out of education. Like, I'm working on my master's degree in artificial intelligence through Johns Hopkins.
Terrific. I'm just curious, and your comments made me think about this. The clients that you're working with, who are companies, what's your sense broadly of where they're at in terms of being prepared to use AI? And probably more that I'm asking the question about smaller companies and mid-sized companies than the Fortune 500, because they have resources that these other companies don't have.
That is a great question. And it makes me want to go in a whole bunch of different directions with all of my thoughts on it. I think a lot of the organizations they think they're a lot further ahead than they need to be. And they're actually way further behind. They're still in the process of trying to figure out how to collect and organize data, but they think they're ready to start doing machine learning and automation stuff. And it's like, no, there's layers of development that have to happen both with your data pipeline and organizationally in terms of your culture in order to get people in the right mindset to do kind of agile processes, getting a data warehouse in place of some kind in order to have a single source of truth that you can reliably ask questions about, run experiments on, and build machine learning models from. So a lot of them are a lot further behind than they think they are, but they think they're a lot closer than they need to be.
So that's super interesting. So one of the things I've done is been managing corporate IT teams for a couple of decades. And what I have found in the companies that I've worked with is that the quality of their data is very poor, which would lead to pretty bad results in trying to implement AI. Do you see that also?
Yeah, that is definitely my experience. I'm sure you've heard time and time again that data scientists, machine learning engineers, and people working in AI, we spend roughly 80% of our time trying to find data, pull it out of systems, clean it, transform it, and get it into a form suitable for actual analysis or building models and stuff. And it's just consistent. Like, every new project I go into, I just expect I'm going to spend that much time just to getting to the point where we can actually start answering questions. But that's the state of the industry. It's getting better. And companies that have been kind of born in a digital world, a purely digital world, are a lot further ahead at that than traditional organizations trying to transition over to being a completely digital or data-driven organization. That's been my experience anyways.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, if you're a relatively new tech company, you're going to be in a very different situation than a 75-year-old manufacturing company, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You've trained over 400,000 programmers. Can you tell us a little bit about your courses?
Oh, sure. So with my consulting service, I essentially do three things. I create online courses. I also do on-site training, and I do one-on-one consulting. And so the bulk of the 400,000 plus people that I've trained are through online courses. But I mean, I've done quite a few on-site workshops, remote webinars and workshops and stuff like that, and quite a bit of consulting as well. The online courses primarily focus on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, but I also still have a few legacy software development best practices courses as well from when I first got started creating online courses. The thing I always keep in mind is that, even though I focus on AI, machine learning, and data science, software development and becoming the best software developer I possibly could be was my original kind of passion. And so I've learned a lot in terms of best practices, especially in the agile space for that. And so, the objective of the courses that I create are to essentially help individuals, businesses, and other organizations become data-driven, AI-first organizations. It's probably the best way to sum it up. Trying to develop your AI strategy, build the organization around a data-driven, AI-first strategy, embrace agile practices to help build the systems out, create a culture of experimentation, build a data pipeline, create machine learning platforms to quickly create models, and then data science experimentation platforms as well. So trying to fill in gaps in the entire process of essentially getting a company from from the beginning to some company that's doing everything in a data-driven AI-first way.
With your typical client, what would be the number of people working in their tech group?
Completely depends. Like I said, I've got tech startups that I work with that are just like 3 guys in a garage, all the way up to like top 10 companies in the world. I'll probably avoid mentioning names here, just for whatever reason. But
of course,
they're very large organizations that I couldn't even tell you how many people they have in their tech departments.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
So what kind of challenges are you tackling in these areas right now?
So I would say there's 3 main areas where I'm tackling issues. So within organizations, the biggest issue I seem to run into is getting buy-in from leadership that have a traditional model of business in their minds. They were taught, this is how you're supposed to do business. This is how you do, essentially how you do it. And unfortunately, they didn't get the memo that this stuff is all obsolete now. Somewhere around the age of the internet and the information revolution, all of this changed, and all these best practices for how to build products and stuff like that kind of went out the window. And the agile, lean startup approach, data-driven analytics approach is clearly dominating. The companies that are doing this stuff are, radically outperforming companies that are still stuck to their old legacy traditional business ways of doing business. And so the solution to that problem is essentially just to start with why. Why are we even doing this? Why are you in business? And why would essentially using data to make decisions benefit you? Why would automating these processes reduce your costs? So then after convincing them or selling them on why this is worthwhile, it's all about education. And throughout the entire organization from the leadership down, we have to figure out what data science is, what it isn't, what are the pros, what are the cons, what can AI do, what can't it do? And then even figuring out how to prioritize a product backlog or a experimentation backlog to figure out what is the path of least resistance to get us through some of these low-hanging fruit and essentially get small wins so that you can get buy-in from the organization for the value of data science and AI. Then problems I face kind of in the general public just with education in general is that there's a lack of education, which is a huge issue because this is happening fast. And there's a lot of misinformation and hype about AI that's just unfortunately not true and misleading. And what we really, really, really want to avoid is ending up in another AI winter because we have so much hype out there and not enough real world, practical results that people become disillusioned by it again. And then we're like, okay, that's all, a waste of our time, and they stop investing in it. So once again, start with why, education, and then set real expectations. And I try to give people a wake-up call. And I think the best version of this, I think it's in Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpowers. I can't remember, but he talks about the Chinese people having their Sputnik moment in terms of AI. When the first deep learning algorithm won go, everyone woke up and they're like, "This is our national initiative. We are going to lead in artificial intelligence," and they put huge investments in it. The Western world just hasn't had that wake-up call yet. And so just trying to get people to realize that this is coming and it's coming fast. So get on board or you're going to get left behind. And then personally, the thing I struggle with the most is just staying on top of everything. I think I just did a little calculation a couple of days ago, and there's something like 500 papers a day on machine learning, AI, and data science in archive in preprint form. And so it's moving really fast. So I have to constantly find solutions to try keeping on top of all of this information. And so I do things like I've got a curated news feed. I watch a lot of people that do a really good job of summarizing and triaging the information, like 2-minute papers. Great. It's a great YouTube video series. Archive Sanity Preserver. And then I read abstracts from new papers on a regular basis. Like every day I probably read 2 or 3 different papers, abstracts at minimum. And then I just have to find time on the weekends to do more in-depth reading and play around with things like GPT-3 and build deep reinforcement learning, models to beat Atari's Breakout for fun, just to stay on top of it all.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I was thinking as you were explaining these challenges that AI is moving so fast that you may tell a client, well, AI can't do this, but then in 3 or 6 months it can. Yeah. So things are changing that fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't know if this is publicly available or not, but I attended a machine learning and data science conference that the University of California, Santa Barbara put on about a year ago, and they had developed a tool that will extract from all the research papers being submitted the exact topic you want to see and send it to you. I thought that was pretty cool.
That kind of stuff's important. And that's why I've got that curated news feed, because I would just be flooded by this every day. So it's like, I just need to see the top like 5 papers on AI, the top 5 papers on data science, and the top 5 papers on machine learning. And then I just, if it's interesting enough, I spend time learning about it. And if not, I just move on.
It's a lot to absorb. For you personally, what most excites you about the potential of AI?
Well, there's a lot of things. And I think you have to look at the short-term things that I'm excited about, and then there's the long-term things. So in the short term, things I'm really excited about here in the last few years, self-supervised learning. I think that's just a really impressive way to teach models using built-in structures of the data in order to improve the model without having to train endless amounts of data, which is just super costly and time, it takes too much time. Multimodal learning, I think, is really interesting. When we've started to combine the text models and the image models together, it's doing some pretty impressive things, which make it clear to me that in order to get to artificial general intelligence, you can't just do it with a text-only model. It's going to require multi-sensory inputs in order to build models that understand the world as a sensory experience rather than just a bunch of text or just a bunch of images. And deep reinforcement learning, I've been excited about that for several years. The stuff I've seen come out of OpenAI and DeepMind and stuff like that's just mind-blowing. They're beating video games that it just looks ridiculously challenging because the reward signals are so delayed from the action. But by programming things like curiosity into these robots, wanting to see something novel as a reward signal, I mean, we beat Montezuma's Revenge and Pitfall, which were the 2 most difficult Atari games that for AI to beat because the reward and the actions were so disconnected. And then data augmentation via simulation. I think a lot of what we're going to be doing in the near future, we'll simulate it in a computer for hundreds of thousands of years of examples to train the model before it ever even sees the real world. And then we just fine tune it in the real world afterwards. And then, like the language transformers like GPT-3 and GPT-4, when it comes out, the rumor is that it's going to have around 100 trillion parameters, which, and it's a rough approximation. We're talking like we're now getting to the computational power of an individual brain in a massive model. So that's going to be really impressive to see that. And then level 4 self-driving. I'm one of the beta testers for Tesla's full self-driving beta program, but it's really impressive at the same time. So the best way to describe it is you'll sit there and you'll be like, oh my God, how is it doing this? How did it figure that out? It's so impressive. And then it will make the stupidest mistake you've ever seen. It's like, no, don't do that. So you have to constantly be monitoring it to take control. But it's coming, and it's coming fast. And in the long term, the things that I'm most interested in are obviously artificial general intelligence. When this happens, when we finally have a human level, flexible and adaptable artificial intelligence, it's literally going to revolutionize the world. There's just no doubt about it. And experts think that could be coming as early as like 2050, and we'll have to wait and see. And then beyond that, we know it's quite likely that artificial superintelligence will happen based on recursive self-improvement and without there being any constraints of biological limitations. And when that happens, we can't even predict what the world's going to be like. It's just going to be so radically different.
Yeah, Ray Kurzweil, of course, predicted AGI a little bit earlier than you just said. But this is one thing that I try to give my viewers is a sense of some things that you think are a long way away arrive much more quickly than you expect. And other things that you thought would have been here by now are taking much longer, self-driving being a great example of that.
We still don't have our flying cars yet. They should have been here a long time ago.
Yeah. Do you have any concerns about AI and how it is used both now and in the future? And specifically, I'm sure everyone would like to hear your thoughts on that side about AGI.
So I actually have a lot of thoughts, things that concern me about artificial intelligence. And like, once again, in the short term, the things that I'm concerned about are, privacy in a world where we have constant AI surveillance. Like, what does privacy even mean? We have very little, we're about to get a lot less. Manipulation of consumer purchases. We just have a lot of data that we can use to make somebody buy something that they really don't need. Misinformation, we can generate massive amounts of propaganda and misinformation with GPT-3. In fact, I think there's currently more AI generated text on the internet than produced by all the humans on Twitter, is what I had heard recently. Wow. So that's huge. And then exploitation, very scary stuff happening with like the deep nude technology and deep fake technology being used to exploit people in ways that we really need to have strong laws against very soon. And then there's, bigger picture stuff like bias and discrimination and creating like self-reinforcing societal issues because we're biasing in certain directions that then feed back down to further discriminate those groups of people. And not having transparency in our models is a huge potential problem with that. And then there's just, a lot of hype about AI. With any new technology, there's always going to be a lot of hype. And the hype is pretty big right now. A lot of promises being made that just can't reasonably be met by modern AI right now. But in the longer term, I think, the weaponization of AI is a huge concern of mine. And, these systems are literally one switch away from being fully autonomous, weapons. And so right now, luckily, we have humans in the loop of every kill decision that's being made. And thankfully, there are a lot of data scientists and AI experts who all signed a petition, petitioning the United States government and the military against allowing fully autonomous weapons, which so far so good. But all it takes is one conflict in someone who doesn't believe in this ethic that could essentially make that a totally different ball game. Our labor economy, I think we're expected to see something like, was it 600 million jobs? I can't remember the exact number. It's probably around 500 million jobs disappearing by 2030 from automation due to the risk factors of those specific jobs. And then the economics of that, like how do we redistribute resources in a society where most of the work of value is actually done by machines rather than humans? Historically, we've used our labor as a way to redistribute the wealth of society. So we're gonna have to come up with a system that can essentially fix that. That's gonna be tricky because there's a lot of pros and cons to universal basic income, negative income taxes, social stipends, and all of these other kind of universal basic ownership ideas. And then a lot of societal problems as well too. If you've got a society filled with AI generated misinformation for the purposes of disrupting, political campaigns or, through the media or whatever, that's a fundamental problem to democracy. If you can't have an informed, educated public, educated or based on the truth, what's actually happening, you can't make informed decisions as a people. And then the biggest of the concerns is, once we finally do get to like artificial general intelligence, what is the purpose? What is our purpose as human beings in a world where most of the work of real economic value is done by machines? Either it's a very good thing for us, and we're essentially freed from the toils of manual labor and knowledge work, redundant knowledge work that we don't want to do, or we essentially become obsolete to the labor economy.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. You just touched on many of the issues that I talk about and that led me to start this effort. And that segues into my next question, which is advice for young people. So, as you said, significant job change coming. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is to prepare people who are vulnerable to that ahead of time. There's certain jobs, certain activities that are going to be more vulnerable to this than others. Ultimately, as you said, down the road, it'll affect everybody. But during that interim period, how do we help prepare people to do something different than what they're doing now that will protect them for longer? And that's something I talk about quite a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that we can do. And I get asked the question, if we can't predict what jobs are even going to exist in another decade or two, when our kids finally get done with school, how can we even prepare them for the future? And, I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I've come up with a couple of answers. And one is that, there's going to be two sets of skills or two types of jobs that are going to be highly valuable in whatever future labor economy we have. High-tech skills are clearly going to be a necessity. You're either going to be creating, training, maintaining, monitoring, managing, or doing something with some kind of intelligent system. And my guess is there's going to be a lot of people that are essentially, a manager won't be a manager of people anymore. You will be a manager of machines doing an automated process. And then on the other side are these very human skills. So, essentially, like nurses, teachers, a whole slew of different occupations where I don't think they're going to be automated in the near future because they're uniquely human. And so I think focusing on those two sets of skills, the high technical skills, so STEM kind of skills, and very human skills, things like establishing trust, communication, collaboration, working effectively in a team, and empathy, just helping develop your skills with empathy and emotional intelligence, I think is very important. And then beyond that, the other advice gets a little, less concrete. We know in general, like T-shaped learning is quite valuable in general. So essentially, you don't want to be, a jack of all trades where you just know a little bit about everything. And you don't want to be so narrowly focused that you can only do one role. You want a very T-shaped set of skills in terms of your breadth and width and depth of the knowledge. And so I think focusing on that, finding things that you're good at, and then essentially drilling down further in those, but having a wide enough understanding of physics and chemistry and mathematics and stuff, even if you're not a chemist and even if you're not necessarily a nurse, but understanding the skills that make the human part of nursing valuable is important. And then the advice I generally just give teenagers and stuff. I do presentations at high schools and for colleges to essentially help them prepare for this stuff. I just say, do something that you love because you're probably going to be doing it for the rest of your life. If you choose it as a career, make sure it's something that you're either good at or you think you could be the best person at it. And so like for me, I was the best person I knew with computers, or I wanted to be the best person at computers. And I got really good at it because of that. I loved it. And I really had a desire to get good at it. And then the third thing is just make sure it pays the bills. There's nothing more frustrating than, doing this thing that you love and not being compensated for it financially. So you're struggling your entire life. And if you just so happen to be interested in, technology, data science, machine learning, or AI, you're in luck because there's no end to this trend in sight. I mean, the top paying tech jobs right now are in AI, machine learning, computer vision, all of the stuff that I find most interesting. So I'm very lucky to have found something both, personally rewarding, socially rewarding, and financially rewarding.
And I think there's some other kinds of jobs that will endure for a while. I think of plumbers and electricians or aircraft engine mechanics, or there's many hands-on skills that are going to be around for quite a while, because to get to the point of the combination of dexterity and knowledge to do that kind of work will take time.
I completely agree. And I think it's one of the common misconceptions in society is that, these jobs are just going to disappear because we fully automate them. But the reality is that most jobs will not be fully automated. Instead, you'll become the technology will become a force multiplier. So we'll just say a nurse, for example, one nurse will be able to care for 10 times as many people because they've got machines doing all of the repetitious, monotonous, the things that the nurses don't actually want to do, so that the nurses and doctors can actually spend their time, working, with compassion, caretaking, and empathy, the things that we can't get from the machines. And so I think when you look at your job, you need to think what tasks, not what jobs, but what tasks within my job are repetitive, simple, dangerous, costly, or any of these other criterion for automation versus what areas of my job or tasks in my job are uniquely human. They require, strategy, compassion, empathy, communication skills, or any of these things that will most likely not be automated in the future. And then focus on the things that are uniquely human to your job. And then just let the machines automate the stuff that you typically don't want to be doing anyways, because it's boring, repetitious, or monotonous. But when you think about that in the big picture, if one plumber or one software developer or one nurse is able to do the work of 10 plumbers, software developers or nurses now, then that puts it puts different pressures on our labor market, because there's no longer the same demand if we're already meeting all of the supply with at 1/10 of the nurses now. But whether that will just allow there to be more nurses and we have better care at the same cost, or if they will try cutting costs by just reducing the number of human nurses and just adding more automation. That's the part that's still yet to be decided.
Yeah, one of the comments I make to my viewers a lot that echoes what you just said is that whatever job you do, and I provide some very introductory resources to AI, learn about it and what it is, because even if it won't replace your job, you will be working with it, and very soon, within a few years.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Even thinking as a software developer, who we feel like we're one of the last jobs that will be automated because we're going to be creating the systems to automate everything else. But as a software developer, my productivity as a result of AI-based tools in just the last few decades, like my IDE is so much more powerful now than it was just by increases in computation, and even without machine learning and AI. But now with all of the new code tools that are going to be coming out in the next generation of machine learning based, like the code synthesis tools or program synthesis tools, code validation tools, things that essentially even helping you with the code metrics and stuff like that, so that you're adhering to best practices. For example, the ReSharper plugin for Visual Studio was probably one of the best teachers I had in my entire career as a software developer. It would suggest these things that at first I'd be like, oh, that's stupid. Why would I invert the if statement? It totally wouldn't. Then I did it, and it would read better and it would flow better too. And I'm like, okay, that's actually a really smart thing to do. And so it kept giving me all these recommendations for my code that now it's like, if ReSharper tells me to do it, for the most part, I assume it's correct. And if I have to try it first in order to prove myself wrong otherwise, because it's been right so many times about these best practices.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course, the nature of these tools is that they continue to get better and better, as you've been saying. Yeah, GPT-4, I'm sure, will be mind-blowing, because all of us as everyday consumers noticed the difference when GPT-3 hit, and instantly how much better voice recognition worked. It was amazing.
Yeah, the natural language processing in GPT-3 still blows my mind. Like, the thing you always have to keep in mind, though, is that it's a really good statistical language predictor and generator. It still has, it can't reason. It can't even do the math in the background. Like if you change the parameters for a math puzzle, it still can't get it right for the most part, because it doesn't understand reasoning. But in terms of like having it generate what seem like completely reasonable sentences and documents based on input data is still pretty mind-blowing. I mean, it'll be writing articles, or technology like this will be writing articles for websites and newspapers and stuff like that, I think, before too long. It's already being used to a great extent, but it's tricky. And I think we're probably seeing about the limits of statistical language prediction. And I think the next generation, the next big thing after GPT-4, when they hit that kind of 1 trillion parameter, or it was 100 trillion parameter mark, is it has to go multimodal, or go into symbolic reasoning, because I just don't think you can push statistical language processing any further. It's not going to produce these like surprisingly amazing results after this.
Yeah. Do you have any specific advice for my viewers who have not gone to college, like thought about how they might prepare themselves for this future that will be here? Really, with my demographics, we're talking about during their prime earning years that this is going to be happening.
Yeah, it's tricky because I did it both ways. I essentially became a software developer without a college degree first, and then I got established. I learned a bunch, and then I went back to college because I hit that ceiling. You can definitely have a great career in software development without a college degree. I don't know that I would advise it to anybody. But if you are already in a situation where it's like, to go back to college would be very difficult, completely understandable. We do have really good online resources for learning, but you have to be a very good self-learner, and you have to have access to the right resources, because you could watch, free YouTube videos all day long, but until you actually are in a class setting where it's structured and you're learning all of the gaps that gaps in your knowledge from just watching a YouTube video here or there, they're filling in critically important information that's often overlooked because the person on YouTube may not know this stuff or not be able to teach it effectively. And practicing, like you just genuinely have to practice. Like learning concepts is one thing, but practice is an entirely different thing. And the way I like to put that is it's one thing to know what a neural network is, but to actually be able to train like a neural network to do something like detect fraud or to detect faces is entirely different. Like you have to have both the knowledge and the ability to do these things in order to be valuable to the job market. And, I think a lot of it's just, taking baby steps, gradually moving your way through your career a step at a time. And that's kind of how I did it. When I hit a spot where I'm like, I don't think I can go any further unless I know something else, I would, pivot and I would learn something new. And I just continuously learned with each new project I was on, constantly switching projects as well too. So like if I had to work on the same project my entire career, I wouldn't know anywhere near as much as I do. But because I chose to work for small software startups where I was literally doing everything from managing the Microsoft Exchange email server to physical network administration to, doing data analytics and, writing code, I got exposure to all of this different stuff constantly. And so my rule of thumb is if you are ever in a job where you feel you are not learning something new every day, that's probably your cue to move on.
Interesting. Good advice. Good advice. So how can my viewers keep in touch with you, follow what you're doing, find out about your new course offerings, etc.?
The best way is through my website. So MatthewRenze.com. I put all of my articles, videos, courses, pretty much everything I do that I think is of value to my audience will be there. And then I also post regularly on Twitter and monthly on LinkedIn as well too. Mostly just trying to get information about the content on my website out to my audience. So MatthewRenze.com is the best place to go.
Great, thank you. We'll put the link below, and thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us today. It was a special treat, and we really appreciate you setting aside the time from your busy schedule to do this.
Absolutely. I was happy to be here.